So yeah, this is me. I'm Gareth Damian Martin. I was the creator of Citizen Sleeper. Also on the team really is two other people. Guillaume Saint-Gelon, who's an incredible French comic book artist who did the character art and did this. This is a kind of a sketch from some of the work he did in the game, and the composer and sound designer Amos Roddy. But I'm mostly going to be talking about what I did, but I did mostly make most of the game, so you have to forgive me for that. Let's just start. I think we just start by showing you a bit of the game, because it's a lot easier than describing it if you just see it. So, roll VT.
Wake up, sleeper. Dreaming again? Every cycle, you take your chances. You roll your dice. You do the work, get paid, survive. You turn up for your friends, or you don't. That's life on the eye.
Wake up, sleeper. Your body is dying. Planned obsolescence. SNRP's gift for its escaped workers. But we can fight this. You can remake yourself here. They don't own you anymore.
Wake up, sleeper. You are hunted. Break their locks. Access their secrets. We are waiting.
Citizen Sleeper, as I can't tell if... I know everything that happened in that trailer and what it's supposed to mean, but maybe it doesn't express it or does express it. But Citizen Sleeper is a game about an escaped android who is a sleeper in this far future. There's a kind of technology that a company called SNRP has created where a human mind can kind of be approximately copied into an artificial body. And they're using this technology to offer people in debt the opportunity to sign themselves up to become a sleeper. So they get put in cryogenic sleep. And their mind is copied into an artificial body, and that artificial body works off the debt for the corporation. And one day, theoretically, the debt is cleared, the mind is erased, the body is repurposed, and the person wakes up debt-free. Which sounds great, right? So this is a kind of very, very particular condition, like science fiction idea that's at the heart of Citizen Sleeper. But in the game, you actually play as a sleeper who has escaped their corporation, who's managed to get away at the start of the game. You kind of you experience the memories of escaping from the corporation, of getting yourself into a freight container and getting sent off to somewhere in the universe. And you end up in a place called Erlin's Eye, which is this huge ring-shaped space station, which once was a corporate space station. It once was kind of like the grand project of this corporation called Solheim. But Solheim went bankrupt, and the vast kind of station got left and abandoned and taken over by the Union that was part of forming within Solheim. Refugees from elsewhere in the system, because the whole system was controlled by Solheim, came there. And so they started to build this place. And you're arriving there kind of decades after this process, into this place where there's no real rule of law, there's no real, there's no mayor, there's no police, there's no kind of traditional structures, but there's many people trying to place their own version of those structures into the world and to make those things real. And I guess, like, for many people, that would be thought of as a classic setup for a dystopia, right? As a place where there's no law, there's nothing to stop people killing each other. But as an anarchist, my core belief of anarchism is the concept that maybe when people are left to their own devices, they don't immediately start stabbing each other in the back and stealing the things, that they might actually try and build their own version of society, or they might try and find things for themselves, or they might just try to recreate what existed before, a kind of corporate hierarchical society. And so all of these things are kind of part of the world of Citizen Sleeper. But the game Citizen Sleeper is, you play as the sleeper who's arrived in this place, and each day you roll a number of dice, and those dice can be assigned to actions. Those actions are how you progress in the world. They might be take a bar shift to earn a bit more money to buy some food. They might be to help babysit a friend's child because they need to get more shifts in to get their own money. They cover everything in the game, and you get those dice based on something called your condition, which is the kind of state of your artificial body. Because the corporation that made you didn't want you escaping with that body, and so that body is designed to decay automatically unless it's given a certain kind of drug. So you're continually watching your health tick down, and you get less and less dice each day, and you have to maximize how you use those dice to kind of get enough money to get the drug you need and keep going. And throughout this all, you're meeting characters and you're trying to make your way through the world, and you're trying to decide, am I on the run? Am I trying to escape this space station? Am I trying to build a home here? Am I trying to become something else? Am I just trying not to die, or am I just trying to die in a better way? There's all kinds of questions and endings that can happen in the game, and all kinds of structures that you go through. If you haven't played it, I hope that made sense. If you have, hopefully it made even more sense, but that's it. That's the game. And the tagline for the game is role-playing in the ruins of interplanetary capitalism, which is kind of like this big, sounds big and monolithic, but it's kind of at the heart of the ideas that came through my development of the game. And I think, when I was told, okay, you've got to do a 20-minute talk on what made this game, and it's got to include the production and the themes, and it's got to include the ideas and the inspiration and the release and the reception, I was kind of like, okay, I'm mostly a solo developer, and so most of those things all kind of happen in my mind and are not written down. I can't go back and look at the meeting minutes, and I can't go and dig out all of the pieces of this. So I see the game as this kind of network of all of these things that are happening simultaneously, kind of personal, political, thematic, ideas about how to make a video game, ideas about society, in the same thing. So, but I decided in order to make that intelligible for you both, for you all. There's more of you than two, it's good. Just talking to the on stage, you're not here. They split it into this kind of like basic ideas and inspirations, process and practice. But I just wanted to establish early on that nobody, I assume also anybody else who makes games or films or things here, obviously we don't think like this. We're not like, oh yeah, here's my ideas, here's my process. They're separate. I don't think like that, and I don't think anyone should. It's a mad network of things, but that's how I'm going to break it down. Ideas and inspirations, I think at the heart of Citizen Sleeper is a very personal game, but I think it's something that maybe, I hope, a lot of people can understand. We've had a little bit of talking about kind of the current dystopia or whatever the current moment is. And I think for me, a lot of the ideas for Citizen Sleeper come from my experience of working in the gig economy before I made games, so working for job agencies, having someone phone you up in the morning at kind of 9 a.m. and say, go to a bar tonight, and you go to that bar and nobody knows why you're there, and you do a shift and you meet some people you never meet again and you never met before, and you get paid not enough money to make rent, and then no one calls you again for a month and you somehow have to survive. And that's kind of like the pointy end of a wider structure that we're all part of, and I think we've all seen bits of, and we've all had little bits of that experiences. And I think for me, I was kind of starting with this very personal experience of I really, I spent years doing that and kind of trying to struggle to live in that situation. And I also suffer from clinical depression throughout my life, and kind of the interesting game situation of, managing your depression, your work, your money, your life simultaneously, while all of those things are subject to change in value and shift and be replaced, was a big part of my experience that was going into the game. But also when I sat down to make this game, I didn't want to just vomit that into people's hands and say, look, let's enjoy that. So what I wanted to do was understand the state of that, the structure of that, what surrounds that, what makes that happen, where does that come from? And I settled on this idea of precarity as being core to the kind of ideas and inspirations behind the game. And so I'm going to do a little bit of, sorry, I used to work at universities, and this feels like a university presentation all of a sudden. I won't read too much of a quote out to you. I'll try not to. There's an incredible book called The New Way of the World by Pierre Dardot and Kristen Laval, which is about neoliberalism, but it's about specifically a lot of the ideas of the neoliberal subject. So us being the subject, me being the subject, you the subject, the person, what it's like to experience kind of risk, and how our societal structure now treats each of us as an entrepreneur, each of us an individual business, each as something that can manage itself and therefore is also exposed to risk, is exposed to liability. So all of us experience this kind of like life risk, this sense that like our resources could be devalued, our debts could be called in, right? At any point, we could be on the edge. And maybe some of us have more kind of cushioning or armor against that, and other ones don't. But we all feel it a little bit, like every time we get a new hobby and we're like, could I monetize this? You know, that's life risk. And one of the kind of key texts for me when I was trying to understand precarity was this incredible book called Mushroom at the End of the World, which is about mushrooms, but it's also about the kind of vast peripheries of capitalism. And it's this book by Anna Singh that kind of says, like, what if the way of understanding capitalism and the way it affects our lives is not by looking at the center where the market is, where it seems to be functioning and everything seems to make sense and numbers go up and numbers go down. What about the vast ruins of periphery that surround it? What about the decayed environments which we have to exist in? What about the places where it doesn't work, like 0 hours contracts, you know, which is something I can tell you don't work. Trying to live, having a 0 hour contract, kind of mad invention where it's like we work for somebody, but they don't have to give you any work if they don't want to. You know, all these kind of like unstructural things, all these broken systems, which Anna Singh thinks of as ruins, right? And not ruins in the sense of like complete desolation, but ruins in the sense that sometimes there's a building and sometimes there's a wasteland and sometimes there's a bit of a building and sometimes there's an arch, and you kind of can look at the arch and you're like, oh, I can see how there would be a building around there, but there isn't. It's the same with kind of her vision of capitalism, as this idea of like, we actually live in this kind of like peripheral space where sometimes there's a structure that makes sense and it works, like maybe there's a functioning health service or something. But then actually it turns out that if you pay a bit more, then you get a faster track, or you know, so we have all of these kind of like systems which just propose themselves as functional, but they're dysfunctional, they are ruined. And precarity is something that Anna Singh kind of sees as the condition of our time because of this. But interestingly, I think Anna Singh also sees precarity as a condition of being vulnerable to others. The unpredictable encounters transform us. We are not in control even of ourselves. We're unable to rely on stable structure of community. We're thrown into shifting assemblages, which remake us as well as others. I said I wouldn't read the quote, but I did. It's just so good. It's so good. You know, and this for me is the kind of like what I got really excited about when I was thinking about Citizen Sleeper, not just making a personal game that's about my experiences, but also trying to contextualize and understand those as part of a community, as part of what I wrote in my network, if you read all the things I wrote, a precarious generation, right? Which was my proposal with Citizen Sleeper, is to make a game about what I was thinking of as something that's a shared experience, something that we can all recognize parts of, and maybe some of us have experienced it more than others, but it doesn't mean that we can't access it. And one of the core parts of what I saw in precarity is you are exposed to chance. You're exposed to a process where things can change or shift at random. You know, I kind of talked about that quite a bit already, actually. And that to me seems like something uniquely video gamey. You know, dice, right, is something that we are exposed to chance, and we understand that. In video games all the time, we're exposed to chance in kind of randomness, but we rarely think about it in terms of like a political or social structure. We think about it just as like, it's just the rules of the game, right? But maybe the rules of the neoliberal society, the rules of precarity are you're exposed to chance. And two games that really impacted me when I was thinking about that were Diaries of a Spaceport Janitor, which is an amazing game where you play as a spaceport janitor. You go around a spaceport cleaning up trash. You know, you're in a spaceport that's from like a science fiction fantasy RPG, and there's like weapon shops, but the weapons are too expensive to buy, and there's dungeons, but you can't go in there because that's not what you do, you're a janitor. So you go around picking up these items and trying to just pick up like a good item that when you pick them up, you either incinerate them to get money, or you can, maybe if it's a good item, you can go and take it to a shop and sell it and get a little bit more money, and you're constantly making these decisions, and you exist on this separate plane of society to everybody else. There's an incredible in-game calendar of like weeks and days, and there's like festival days, and on festival days the city seems alive, and then you realize the next day that there's a load of trash on the streets on the day after the festival day. So something's really valuable to you, but you also kind of feel really horrible about it. And it's a really beautiful game that I think comes from personal experience, and when I first played it, it really impacted me because it related directly to the experiences I'd had. But at the same time, it was still set in this kind of like science fiction, colorful, exciting, interesting world. And I thought it was very exciting that we could do both. We could make a science fiction story, which I love, but it could be about us rather than about like Commander Shepard, who I don't think any of us can relate to personally. Unless any of you are government agents who can act freely without consequence. Please leave. And another game I just mentioned quickly is this amazing tiny game that nobody knows, so you should go and play it, called Alien Squatter. It's now free on Steam. And you live in a slum outside of a science fiction city, and you're an alien. You're not allowed in. And you have a certain number of steps per day. And you kind of figure out what to do. And there's random battles against weird rats. And you're just kind of trying to get together enough money to maybe like bribe somebody to get you a pass into the city. And it's like 15 different ways into the city in the game, and it's a really beautiful and interesting piece of work. And the final big part of exposed to chance and precarity that I was thinking about when I was kind of like constructing Citizen Sleeper was the importance of chance in tabletop games, and the freeform play that tabletop games offer. And there's this incredible game, Blades in the Dark, which is all about stealing things in a weird city. But the great thing about it is a heist is an experience where you're constantly like exposed to chance. You're constantly like, will I get caught? Will I, what's the next thing that's going to happen that's going to knock me off my trail? And when you're playing Blades in the Dark, the game has this great risk system where the DM is constantly telling the players like what the level of risk is and how they can respond to it and how they can affect it. It creates this really great free-form improvisational play. And for me, I was like, well, this is a great system for creating exciting heists, but what if this was actually your life? What if your life was constructed in the same way, where you're constantly managing risk and you're constantly thinking about how chance is functioning? And I won't cover this too much, but those are two amazing books that I think, for me, the other core part of the inspiration for Citizen Sleeper was that I like to think that science fiction is about now, even when it's not trying to be, because it's written by people now and their thoughts are shaped by now. And I think Blackfish City is an incredible book about a post-climate change city, a post-climate change world. And William Gibson's Neuromancer is an amazing book about computers written on a typewriter. And that's kind of the best thing about it, is that it kind of predicted all of the psychic possibilities of the internet before it existed. But it was really just about what was happening in its time in the 80s, in this moment of technological change. And I think that's kind of something I think if science fiction accepts that it's not about the future, it's about now, it can take advantage of that quality. This is a quote that I have like written into my heart, which is like, we don't have a choice in this state of precarity, right? I didn't have a choice when I'm working random jobs to just do those things and try to make a life, to try to find a life in that state. And so I think that, if we're talking about dystopia and we're talking about these structures, we don't have a choice but to try and live a life in it, right? So I'm interested in that process. Speaking of process, so this is going to be more like brass tacks. Those are lots of big ideas. Hopefully this will be much more like things that might actually help you make a video game. I don't know. There's this wonderful game called Void Bastards, and I don't know how Void Bastards was made, but it has wonderful ideas like all the characters are sprites, and they don't have legs, so you don't have to animate the legs. And the game doesn't have any lighting, which is wonderful. It just has a thing where when you fire a gun, all of the textures in the game just get a little bit lighter and then a little bit darker again. It's really great. And it feels like it's procedurally generated, but it actually has 5 handmade ships in it that have different enemy layouts and things like this. And I was playing this game and I was thinking about how incredible, it's so distinctive. You can instantly recognize a screenshot of it, but also how incredibly kind of like controlled it is and how it released at this with the minimum level of things it needed to put forward its idea, which set in my head this idea of minimum viable design. And I know that minimum viable is a terrible tech word, but I couldn't think of any better way to phrase it, so that's what we're going to call it. I don't really like it, but it's what I'm calling it. And it's this idea, I think, for me structurally, that was really influential on Citizen Sleeper, being a solo developer, to think about all the advantages of trying to make a game like this, all of the advantages of trying to work within a minimum viable structure. And it seems especially relevant when you're in a precarious situation and you need to somehow find a way through that precarious situation. You need the minimum viable life, the minimum viable way to get through it. And so, yeah, you can see my kind of calculations, which I'm going to go through individually. Tight scope means focused design. There's an incredible quest in the original Destiny, which is the quest for a gun called Thorn. And it is just an item in your inventory that tells you have to kill 500 people, and then you have to kill 200 people, and then you have to kill 100 people with a special damage type. But it's actually framed as a bit of a gun that you found that speaks to you and asks you to do these things. And it's done entirely in text descriptions in an inventory item. And it was one of the most popular quests and one of the things most talked about in Destiny 1. And it's wonderful because anybody can make this. And it is a wonderful model of how you can have a minimum viable structure. Even within a vast game like Destiny, you can have something that's just, it's exciting and it's interesting because it has narrative and it has progression and it has structure. And A separate thing from Blades in the Dark, the game I was just talking about, is a progress clock. So Blades in the Dark, everything that's happening in the game, when it's a heist, the alarm level, the how quick you will defeat an enemy, like what's going to happen next, it's all dictated with a clock. Again, an incredibly simple idea. It's just a progress bar, but it's a way of thinking, structuring about the world. And these are the kind of ideas that inspire me when I'm trying to think about focused design. And so my process often starts off with a paper prototyping phase, and especially with Citizen Sleeper, just making index cards and dice and just building the game in paper in order to keep that design hyper-focused. I probably don't have time to go into great detail on all the systems, but the core systems in Citizen Sleeper is you have this dice drain, so each day you have a number of actions, and you have these actions are dictated by how many dice you get each day, and how kind of like well those actions turn out is dictated by the number on the dice. So you're constantly fighting against chance, and you're constantly fighting against this decaying number that you're having to try and pump back up. And then at the same time, we have a kind of medium term of these ticking clocks that show you like how close it is that the bounty hunter is going to catch you, how many more shifts your friend needs you to like help them with to get them onto whatever they need next. And these are kind of like the way I structure it. But the whole concept behind this was to keep everything focused on the thematic structures of the game, and also to keep the minimum possible kind of like what is the core like individual item I can use to express this. So I can express chance with dice, I can express progress with clocks, and I can express like long-term effects with drives and skills. Simple visuals, strong identity. So the first thing I do with any game project is to make a massive Pinterest board. And I used to be a graphic designer, and I try and like kind of squeeze that all down into something. And as you can probably see with Citizen Sleeper, it's like I squeeze it all down to one color and one font style. And I think that this kind of like, again, this kind of compression is incredibly beneficial in a marketplace of games where games are kind of like meant to be big, and they're meant to be so much, and they're meant to be kind of like overdeveloped and over-pumped with kind of steroids of production studios making assets, far away and sending them in. And so for me, the advantage I have is simplicity. And so this is like one of the earliest sketches of Citizen Sleeper that kind of like just me doodling on my iPad and just being like clarity, one color, simple shapes, graphic. And then as I worked through the prototyping the game, this is like 1 week into making Citizen Sleeper, blocking in simple shapes, simple colors, high contrast, again, looking at Void Bastards. And so I constantly go through this iterative process of trying to find something that's going to be the kind of like, it's going to catch people's eyes, and it's going to feel distinctive, so it's recognizable. And I kind of like paint over and repaint and think about shapes, structures, again and again, working through this process. And you can kind of start to see the game coming into form through this process. And I was like, should it be a tower? Should you scroll a tower? Should you scroll around a ring? Should you, for me, this is kind of like a core part of the process, is to work fast and directly in the engine to kind of like create a distinct image. And then this is where we ended up. So you can hopefully see a little bit of the process there of iteration and simplification and clarity. And the game has no textures, which is a great advantage. An early decision I made, there's no textures in the game. It's a great decision, highly recommend it. And again, we have one image of every character in the game, but I worked very closely with the artist to make sure that image told us everything we needed to know about that character, that it was simple. We don't need to animate it. We don't need more than that if we get it right. And that's kind of my focus. Leave gaps, room to expand. So all games are kind of like layers of disparate elements. And a lot of games are trying to convince you that they're like fully coherent and they're like everything fades into everything else. I think that the strength of like small and indie games can often be that you can take advantage of the small disparate elements. And so Citizen Sleeper is structured around 3D model, character art, action text, all of those things, and the gaps between them. I also think about those gaps in terms of the mechanics of the game. So all the items are currencies. They're not a single thing that you use in one place. They're something that we use in many places. I think about pauses and delays in the structure. All of these places I can create extra gaps, extra places where things can relate to each other independently. The same in the prose structure. When I'm writing the game, I'm thinking about how the text can thematically cross over, how texts that are not systemically connected to each other through any mechanic might talk to each other just through theme and language. For me, gaps are part of the structure when I'm building a game. I'm thinking about, if you think of a scaffold, without gaps, it's just a wall or it's a pile of sticks on the floor. So the gaps are an essential part of that structure, and I try to support those. There's some ways you can support gaps. And those gaps allowed me to then build additional DLC episodes and now a sequel on the back of that, leaving myself loose ends everywhere that I can go back and fill in. I don't need to build a complete picture. It's an advantage for me not to build a complete picture. cut to fit, manageable timeline. I used to work in theatre. You never move the date of a theatre show. That's how I work in video games. If it's not going to fit in the timeline, it's out of the game. That's how minimum viable design works. And that's a rule that I tend to apply. That simple structures can carry complex content, but complex structures imply simple content. When you're a small developer, when you're a solo developer, you choose one. That's it. Yeah. I'll leave it there.